What if the illness was not bad luck? What if the cancer, the autoimmune disease, the chronic pain, the inflammatory condition that arrived without warning and without obvious cause? What if it was not random? What if the body had been sending signals for years through fatigue and tension and gut disturbances and a persistent low-grade sense of something being wrong? And the signals were never heard, never named, and never addressed. Because the life was too full, because stopping felt impossible, because saying no felt selfish, because the needs of everyone else had always come first. Dr. Gabor Maté spent 3 decades as a physician working with patients who had serious illness, cancer, multiple sclerosis, ALS, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease. And across those 3 decades, he noticed something that the conventional medical model had no framework for. The patients who became most ill were often the most giving, the most accommodating, the most unable to say no. Not always, but often enough that it could not be coincidence, often enough that he wrote a book about it. That book is When the Body Says No. And the question it asks is the most important question in this entire series. If the body keeps the score, as van der Kolk showed us, and if the quality of sleep is the foundation of every physiological system, as Walker showed us, and if the breath is the hinge between the nervous system and body, as Nestor showed us, then what is the emotional life doing to the body? Not theoretically, biologically, specifically, measurably. That is what Maté spent 3 decades finding out. Before the framework, Maté himself, he is not a detached researcher. He is a physician who recognized his own patterns in his patients, a man who understood intellectually the cost of emotional suppression and who found himself repeatedly prioritizing the needs of others over his own health and presence. His honesty about this is the foundation of the book's authority. He is not telling you what you should do. He is telling you what the body does when the emotional life goes unacknowledged, and what 3 decades of clinical observation taught him about the relationship between who we learn to be in childhood and what our bodies eventually express in midlife and beyond. Van der Kolk showed us that trauma lives in the body. Maté shows us that it does not stay quietly. It speaks, and when it is not heard through awareness, it speaks through illness. The first key insight is the one that anchors the entire Maté framework, and it is both scientifically precise and deeply confronting. The mind and body are not separate systems. They are one system. The same nervous system that processes emotion also regulates immunity, inflammation, hormonal function, and cellular repair. The field that studies this is called Psychoneuro immunology, and its findings, accumulated across decades of rigorous research, are unambiguous. Chronic stress, emotional suppression, and the persistent activation of the fight-or-flight response measurably degrade immune surveillance, increase inflammatory markers, disrupt hormonal regulation, and compromise the body's ability to identify and destroy abnormal cells before they become disease. This is not a metaphor. This is physiology. The immune system has receptors for every neurotransmitter and stress hormone the brain produces. When the brain is chronically stressed, chronically suppressed, chronically running a program that says your needs are secondary, the immune system receives that signal, and over years and decades it responds accordingly. Swart showed us the neural plasticity of the brain. Maté shows us the immunological plasticity of the body, the way the emotional life writes itself into the biology, organ by organ, cell by cell, with the same quiet inevitability that compound interest builds a portfolio. David was a 53-year-old architect and the person everyone in his life called when something needed doing. He had been the reliable one since childhood, the eldest of four, the one his mother leaned on, the one who learned early that his own distress was less important than the smooth functioning of everyone around him. He was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis at 49. His rheumatologist gave him the biological explanation: an autoimmune process, the immune system attacking its own tissue. Maté's framework gave him a different and complementary question. What had his immune system been expressing that he had not? He spent 6 months in therapy for the first time in his life, not as a cure, as a hearing. He told me the most surprising thing was not what he discovered about the illness. It was what he discovered about the 40 years of signals he had learned, very early and very thoroughly, to override. The second key insight is the one that most directly explains how the emotional suppression pattern is installed and why it is so difficult to recognize from the inside. Maté identifies 3 psychological patterns that appear with striking consistency across his most seriously ill patients: the compulsive need to be good, to be accommodating, agreeable, and inoffensive regardless of internal cost; the automatic repression of healthy anger, the inability to feel or express anger, even in situations where anger is an entirely appropriate and protective emotional response; and the profound difficulty identifying and honoring one's own needs. A chronic orientation toward the needs of others at the expense of self-awareness and self-care. These patterns are not character flaws. They are survival adaptations. They were learned in childhood environments where emotional authenticity was unsafe, where the expression of need, distress, or anger threatened the relationship with the caregiver the child depended on for survival. The child who learned that being good kept the peace, that anger brought punishment or withdrawal, that their own needs made them a burden, that child became an adult whose nervous system runs a permanent background program of emotional suppression, and that program, running continuously beneath consciousness, is a chronic physiological stressor as real and as measurable as any external threat. Jerome was a 47-year-old secondary school principal who described himself with quiet pride as someone who never lost his temper. He had not experienced what he recognized as anger in over 20 years. He had been diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease at 44. He read Maté's second chapter and encountered for the first time the concept of healthy anger. Anger as a biological signal, like pain, that communicates a boundary has been violated or a need has gone unmet. He had not suppressed his anger because he was a calm person. He had suppressed it because he had learned, in a household where his father's anger was unpredictable and frightening, that anger itself was dangerous. The suppression was not wisdom. It was adaptation. He began working with a therapist specifically on anger recognition, not anger expression in the dramatic sense, but the ability to notice the signal, name it, and use it as information rather than immediately overriding it. His gastroenterologist noted a significant reduction in inflammatory markers at his next review. Jerome told me the body had been saying something for 3 years that he had only just learned to hear. The third key insight is Maté's most practically actionable and the one that connects most directly to every practice the Vitality Edit series has been building. Authenticity is physiology. The chronic performance of a self that is disconnected from genuine internal experience, the smile that masks distress, the yes that overrides an internal no, the relentless competence that conceals exhaustion, is not simply emotionally costly, It is biologically expensive. Every act of self-betrayal, every moment of denying an internal signal to maintain an external performance, activates the stress response. Cortisol rises, inflammatory markers increase. Immune surveillance degrades. The autonomic nervous system remains in sympathetic dominance. The chronic fight-or-flight state that Nestor showed us the breath can regulate, that Walker showed us sleep is designed to repair, that van der Kolk showed us trauma locks the body into. Maté's contribution is naming the daily, accumulated, socially normalized acts of self-betrayal that keep the stress response active even in the absence of obvious external threat. The path he prescribes is not dramatic. It is incremental. It begins with the capacity to notice, to develop enough internal awareness to register what the body is actually experiencing beneath the performance. Not to immediately act on every internal signal, but to hear it, to acknowledge it, to stop overriding it before it has even been named. Marcus was a 40-year-old GP, a doctor who gave his patients the attentiveness he had never learned to give himself. He had developed chronic fatigue syndrome at 38. He understood the biological mechanisms of stress and immunity better than most people he knew. What he did not understand until he read Maté was the gap between knowing something intellectually and inhabiting it physiologically. He began a single daily practice, 5 minutes each morning, asking one question: what am I actually feeling right now? And what does my body need today that I have not been giving it? Not a dramatic therapeutic intervention, a daily act of internal listening. He told me that the first 3 weeks the answer was almost always the same, tired and unwilling to admit it. But the act of naming it, of giving the internal state a word before overriding it, changed something in how the day unfolded. Not always, but enough. The body, Maté teaches, does not need to be fixed. It needs to be heard. 5 ways to apply when the body says no right now. 1. Conduct a no audit this week. For 7 days, notice every time you say yes when your body's first response was no. Do not change the answer yet. Just notice the gap between the internal signal and the external response. Awareness precedes change. 2. Learn to locate emotion in the body rather than only in the mind. When a difficult situation arises, before you analyze it, scan your body. Where do you feel it? Your chest, your gut, your throat, your jaw. The body registers emotional experience before the thinking brain has formed an opinion. Developing this capacity is the foundation of everything Maté prescribes. 3. Identify your suppression pattern. Which of the 3 does most of your internal override energy go toward? Compulsive goodness, repressed anger, or the minimization of your own needs? Name it specifically. The pattern you can name is the pattern you can begin to work with. 4. Practice the one-question morning check-in. Before the day captures you, before the phone, before the obligations, before the performance begins, ask, what am I actually feeling right now, and what does my body need today? 1 minute, every morning. This is the most accessible entry point into the self-awareness Maté identifies as the primary protective factor against the mind-body disconnection that precedes illness. 5. Bring Maté's framework to your existing vitality edit practices. Your coherent breathing from Nestor is also a tool for accessing parasympathetic safety before conducting an internal audit. Your sleep practice from Walker creates the physiological conditions in which emotional processing becomes neurologically possible. Your body awareness from van der Kolk is the same awareness Maté is asking you to develop. The series has been building this capacity all along. Your 7-day challenge. Day 1, no audit begins. Notice every internal no you override today. Day 2, body scan practice. Locate 3 emotions in the body before you locate them in the mind. Day 3, identify your primary suppression pattern and write one specific example from this week. Day 4, morning check-in practice begins. 1 question, 1 minute, every morning from today. Day 5, identify one relationship or situation where you consistently override an internal signal and write what that signal has been trying to tell you. Day 6, bring coherent breathing into your internal audit. 5 minutes of nasal breathing at 5.5 breaths per minute before your morning check-in. Notice how the body's signal becomes clearer in a regulated state. Day 7, write a letter to your body. Not a therapeutic exercise, a practical one. What has it been trying to tell you? What signals have been running in the background that the performance of daily life has been overriding? What would change if you heard them? Drop 1 word in the comments that describes what shifts when you stop performing and start listening. Just 1 word. I read every single one. When the Body Says No is not a comfortable book. It asks a question that most of us would prefer not to answer. But the body has already been answering it. In the inflammation, in the fatigue, in the chronic conditions that conventional medicine treats without asking what preceded them. Maté is not asking you to abandon your commitments, your care for others, or your drive. He is asking you to include yourself in the equation, not as a luxury, as a biological necessity. Hit the like button if this series is changing how you inhabit your body. Subscribe and hit the bell. Video 5 of the Vitality Edit is coming, and the series keeps going deeper. Your free downloads are in the description. Thank you for being part of CosmiReads. Breathe, heal, rise. See you in the next one.